It should be okay to say to a friend or a family member or a romantic partner, I love you, I love spending time with you, but I'm going to spend some time alone right now, and it's going to be good. And in fact, there's research to suggest, somewhat paradoxically, that if you have some good quality me time, the next time you interact with someone, you experience it more positively.
Hey, it's Julie. Welcome to Uncomfy. Staying open to other people is hard for a lot of us right now. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in every interaction, always just a little, or sometimes a lot, uncomfortable. But I don't want to give up on connection or retreat into a bubble where everybody is just like me. I want to stay curious, hopeful, and human. And that's what this show is about. So let's get uncomfy.
I remember thinking, nobody knows exactly where I am. No one knows what I'm doing right now. If something were to happen to me, I would just disappear and no one would know. And it, felt like my skin was crawling. Like it was a very visceral experience, both like from a physical standpoint and of course my brain was spinning around with all of the possibilities. So that's probably the apex of that experience for me.
This is Robert Coplan. He's a professor of psychology at Carleton University, and he has a book called The Joy of Solitude, How to Reconnect with Yourself in an Overconnected World. He's with me today. Professor Coplan, Rob, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Julie. It's really great to be here.
All right, so give us a little bit of the context. What was going on that dropped you into this intense moment of isolation?
Yeah, so this was quite a while ago. I'll date myself now and say this was right when I finished university, pre-cell phone and pre-internet in a lot of ways. And I had just finished my undergraduate degree in psychology. And I had the early 20s kind of, fork in the road decision about what I wanted to be when I grew up. And on one side was graduate school and potentially a career, as a psychologist. And at the other side was potentially a career as a musician, because I'd always been very active as a musician, songwriter, singer. I play piano, and that was something I was super passionate about and really interested in. And I was trying to decide, what do I want to do? And I had a 4-month period in between my, my degree that I finished and I was about to start graduate school in that September. So I spent the 4 summer months basically doing something that I think only an early 20s person would just decide to do on a whim, which is I hopped in my car and I just drove south and I spent 4 months driving around the southern US, basically as an itinerant musician, stopping and wherever I could find a gig in any little town or city that I went through, piano bars or lounges of hotels or, the brandy sniffer, and I'm playing for tips. And I eventually ended up in Jacksonville, Florida, where I spent a month as an organ player for a minor league baseball team. So it was, a very formative experience, but a lot of alone time. And for me, that was like the best and the worst of alone time right there in a single set of experiences, because you're lonely and you're cut off and you don't know anybody and you're really challenging yourself by disconnecting yourself from everything that you know. And I was just a kid. I'm 21 years old and I'm, out on my own for really the first time. And so that was really difficult and really feeling very, cut off and isolated. And, to me, that really illustrates all of the bad stuff that solitude can, put upon us, especially when it's kind of like an unwanted or an unchosen solitude.
Right. And that's an important distinction that you make in the book, that whether you've chosen solitude and whether you're doing it in the right way or the right way for you, right? A lot of this is so individual. So sticking with your story for just a moment, young 20s, you're like out on the road looking for pianos that you can sit down. It's too bad you weren't a guitarist or a saxophonist.
Yeah, it would have been easier to have something to carry around.
Carried your instrument. So drop us back into, one of those moments. I imagine they were like those long stretches in the car by yourself, right? Yeah. Like stuck with your thoughts and before podcasts, and you're like like trying to catch up with a radio station.
Yeah, or even in between radio stations and just there's nothing coming through. And I'll tell you what I ended up doing, which is at the time was it just happened. It was kind of intuitive. And of course, 35 years later, I've learned all the reasons why it worked. But what I did is I kind of tried to flip the script a little bit in my head. And, I was thinking of this alone time as a punishment in some ways, right? Like, I am being forced to do all this alone stuff to get something that I want, which is, this opportunity. But, this is the unintended bad stuff that I get on my way to looking for gigs and trying to see if I can be a musician. And then, at some point I kind of flipped the script and I said, maybe this could be an opportunity, right? Maybe this could be even a gift, right? The gift of the chance to have some alone time, a chance where I can write the script and I can make the decisions and I can, be autonomous. I can choose what I want to do and how I want to do it. And there's so much freedom in that. And I don't know if it was any particular moment or so long ago, I can't give you like the specific, I thought this and then it happened. But I will tell you now, with the, with the advantage of hindsight and some scientific learning, that what I was doing, just changing the way I was thinking about it, actually turns out to be one of the simplest, and I mean, it seems so simple, ways to enjoy our solitude more, is just if people are instructed to literally think happy thoughts while they are in solitude, it improves their experiences of it. I mean, it sounds so simple that it can't possibly be true, but, and of course we can talk all about it, but yeah, so somehow I started thinking some happier thoughts, and that's what made the difference for me.
Right. You start your book with an invitation to the reader to set a timer and sit and do nothing alone for 15 minutes. And so I did it. And I mean, what's the typical experience that people have when they do this?
Yeah, so that idea was based on a fairly famous experiment that was done about 10 years ago with college students, where they were asked to do exactly that: sit alone in a room on a chair, 15 minutes, no technology, nothing to do, just sit alone with your thoughts. So the vast majority of them, when they were, asked about it afterwards and talked about their emotions and how they felt, they hated it. They were bored. And they've even found it aversive, And then the fun kind of catch, in one of the versions of those experiments, the participants were given the opportunity, if they wanted to, like while you're there, just hanging out, doing nothing for 15 minutes, press this button and it'll give you an electric shock, and not like a dangerous electric shock, but a painful one. And they got to try it out ahead of time, so it wasn't just that they were just trying something just to kind of see what it was like. So they tried it, they saw that it hurt, and they were told, if you want to do this, go ahead. And more than half of the participants self-administered a painful electric shock at least once, many more times than that, just to have something to do. It was so aversive to sit and do nothing for 15 minutes that they would rather shock themselves than do that, which is, I mean, it's incredible to contemplate. But, that tells us, in general, a lot of people really just dislike solitude, right? Well, at least they think that they do, because my argument would be like, you don't have to do solitude like that.
You're
That's
doing
one
it
way
wrong.
that you can do solitude, right? Like that, and some people might love that, but it's certainly not for everybody.
Yeah, I have so many questions because I love solitude. Like, I love to go on big vacations by myself. I live alone. I spend a lot of time on my own. And I would say 90% of the time, it is the only state that I'd like. It's not like I'm not like, oh, I'm so lonely, right? Like I don't experience it that way. So maybe I'm probably on the far spectrum of like introversion, people who are accustomed to. But when I did this, like, set a timer, sit and do nothing for 15 minutes, the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I was just kind of with my thoughts. I tried, and I was really trying not to look at the timer. At about, probably, I don't know, but around the 10-minute point, I started to become sure that I had set the timer wrong, because it felt like I had been sitting there. I'm like, surely this is more than 15 minutes. Like, this must have been I bet I've been sitting here for a half hour. Like, I better check, And just when I got to the point where I was like, I truly, I can't do this anymore. Like, I'm bored out of my mind, and this can't be right. Like, this is way longer than 15 minutes. That's when the alarm went off, right?
Yeah.
Which was interesting to me too. But the lesson for me was, okay, solitude and boredom, sitting alone doing nothing, that doesn't work for me. And I'm rarely doing that in my life.
And that's not the same thing, though, right? That's why that experiment is interesting, but it's more about boredom and being disconnected from technology than it is really about solitude. And I think it illustrates one of the myths that we have about solitude, which is that in order to get benefits from being alone, from solitude, we need to put out a yoga mat and fold our legs and meditate.
Yes, and meditate,
right? Which, don't get me wrong, of course, meditation is awesome, and there's a lot of very well proven
it's a
benefits
really good
for our
skill.
health.
I've learned that too. So that's what I was doing for the first 10 minutes, and I was enjoying myself.
And people should meditate. I absolutely advocate it. But it's, as you said, even for someone who enjoys spending time alone, sitting and doing nothing, or just thinking, whatever it is that you're doing for your solitude time, that's not for you. And it turns out that's cool. Like, it's okay for it not to be for you. There's lots of different ways you can get benefits from solitude. The most important thing when you're deciding what to do is that you choose something that's meaningful for you, that's enjoyable, that you're engaged in, that is, interesting. And if you're choosing an activity that is for you, you're going to get those benefits. It's kind of like the you do you idea of solitude, right? Like, you find what you want to do, and that's what's going to work. And it doesn't have to be sitting alone with your thoughts. Like, you can be choosing to just unwind and, maybe just listen to music or go for a walk and, use it for restoration or to recharge your battery. Solitude takes the edges off negative emotions, and right. So it helps to calm us down and make us feel a little bit more centered. It can also be a place where we get a lot of stuff done. and we're uninterrupted and we can focus. It's also a great breeding ground for creativity. I call it an incubator for creativity because, solitude is a great place for figuring out stuff and getting those kind of aha moments. It's a place where we can explore ourselves, learn about ourselves, improve our relationship with ourselves, which in turn improves our relationship with others. So there's a lot of different good stuff that you can get out of solitude, and everyone's going to kind of find their niche. I think the activity that they're going to want to do. Maybe they are knitting, maybe they are exercising, maybe they are, playing Candy Crush on their phone. Whatever's going to, help them in that moment to do what their, personal goal is, that's what they should do.
Okay, you mentioned phone. I'm glad you did, because that's the thing that's on the tip of my tongue here. So is it solitude if I am sitting alone in a room physically, but I'm texting or I'm interacting with people on social media somehow?
Yeah, that's the big technological elephant in the room, right? The advent of, virtual social connection has really made us re-examine what solitude is. And I think it actually poses an existential threat to solitude because, it used to be if you were physically separated from other people, you were in solitude. Right. But now, of course, as you've mentioned, not only could you be texting, you could be physically alone, you could be FaceTiming with people, literally having a face-to-face conversation with lots of people on your phone. And so it really does make us have to kind of re-examine. So I have a little bit of advice around that. So I would say, generally speaking, when you are using your phone, or if you're using your phone in solitude, use it for good reasons, not evil reasons. Okay, so evil reasons might be, scrolling social media, and that's not good for you no matter what. But some people also use their phone to what I would call social wash their solitude. So they don't like spending time alone. They always want to be socially connected. So when they're alone, they virtually social connect. And to me, it kind of takes them, out of some of the potential advantages. For me, solitude is being off stage, right? It's being a chance to have that step away, not be in the spotlight. You don't have to, worry so much about your facial expression, what you're saying, the audience that's evaluating you. You don't have to watch other people's posture, facial expression, the words, the tone of their voice. There's so much input that we get when we're around other people, right? So solitude is stepping off of that stage. It's the big, you have a break. If your phone is alerting you to a new text every 30 seconds while you're alone, that's not off stage. If you're FaceTiming with people, that's not off stage, right? So yes, sometimes when you are alone and you're lonely and you want to connect with someone, absolutely use your phone to help you connect. But don't make all of your solitude just, virtual social connection. Use some of your alone time for actual solitude, which for some people might be putting their phone away completely. For others, it might be just turning off their notifications and then using their phone to help them in solitude, to listen to music, to read. There's meditation apps, right? You can use your phone for positive purposes while you're alone, as long as you kind of put those social barriers in place so that it is actually that off-stage experience.
Yeah, I love that differentiation, the off-stage thing. That's that's really helpful, because that's the sense that I crave, or the sensation, the recharge as a true introvert that I need to sort of fill my battery again. So you're differentiating, which is really interesting, between alone and lonely, or solitude and lonely.
A very important distinction.
Yeah. Talk me through that.
Okay. So loneliness is a really bad feeling that we get when there's a mismatch between the social life that we want, the quality and the quantity of our social relationships and interactions, and what we actually have. So if our need to belong, that's sort of the psychological term. If our need for social connection is not being met, that discrepancy makes us feel lonely, which is this awful feeling that is just so damaging for our well-being, our mental health, even our physical health. There was a study by the Surgeon General's office a few years ago suggesting that chronic loneliness and social isolation is as bad for our physical health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So loneliness sucks. It's really bad. People try to get me to say, oh, loneliness is not such a big deal because you talk about the positive side of solitude. I'm like, no, loneliness is a big deal. We need to pay attention to it. But loneliness is not solitude, right? You can feel lonely even when you're surrounded by other people. A lot of us have the experience of, you go to a party, maybe you don't know everybody there so well. You stand in the corner, you're sipping on your drink, you're watching everyone else engage in these, heartfelt conversations. They seem to be really connected to each other. They're laughing and there's inside jokes, and you're watching them, be so intimate. And then you leave feeling more lonely than when you got there, right? So it's not just about, being around people. And at the same time, of course, you can be in solitude and not feel lonely at all. So if loneliness is a bad feeling, solitude is a place. And solitude is a place, particularly if you choose to go there, where, as we've seen, there's a lot of potentially good things waiting there for you.
Yeah. So we're wired for social connection, sort of on this
Hmm.
deep human kind of.
Yes.
There are adaptation reasons why
Hmm.
over many millennia humans
Agreed.
would sort of create, like that's,
Yeah.
you've sort of alluded to that. I think we can all
Hmm.
agree that,
Hmm.
obviously you need it for survival in some cases, and also we're just kind
Hmm.
of wired for it. So are we also wired to like physically and psychologically need solitude?
Yeah, so it's less well established, I would say, from a sort of a scientific perspective, but people certainly have
Mm-hmm.
talked about the need for solitude.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can see how even just the respite idea, the break from the constant input, a chance for that restoration, a chance for your nervous system and your your emotions, everything to kind of have that reset. You can certainly see the evolutionary advantages of that. But one of the reasons why I know that we have a need for solitude is because if we don't meet that need, it causes trouble. Okay, so for example, over the last few years, we have been, people have focused for good reason on what happens when you get too much solitude, and that's loneliness, particularly when it's unwanted. But we decided just a few years before COVID started, actually, to investigate what happens if you don't get enough solitude. And then when I set out to study this, not only had nobody studied it before, but there wasn't even really a name in the English language to sort of name the bad feelings that could arise if you don't have enough time alone. So we decided to kind of base it on the idea of loneliness, but make it the other side of the coin. So if loneliness is what happens when there's a discrepancy between your wanted and your actual social life, we coined the new term aloneliness to describe the bad feelings that happens if there's a discrepancy between your needed and actual solitary life. So if you're not getting enough good quality me time, what's going to happen to you? So it turns out that what happens to you is you feel stressed, you feel grumpy, you're in a bad mood, and you even can lead to symptoms of depression. So it's a lot of the same kinds of outcomes that are associated with feeling lonely. Although, of course, we're just beginning to study this kind of new phenomena. But to me, it's like a public service announcement. Like, this is the thing. Okay, you might be feeling grumpy and in a bad mood and stressed out, and you don't know why. But the reason could be because you're not getting enough time alone.
Yeah, I'm not going to stop thinking about loneliness as a concept here for
And
the
it's
next.
and again, get the word out, right? Like, this is, and
Yeah.
that there's a message there that also says it should be okay to ask for alone time. There is still a bit of a stigma around this, right? Like, there are still some, in North America and a lot of Western cultures, there's still a stigma around going to a restaurant alone or going to see a movie by yourself, right? So,
Yeah. Or even like the words, we have
yeah,
like social butterfly,
right.
and like
But
there's positive
there's
words for
loner and
social.
hermit and all these kind of negative
Yes.
terms for people, cat lady, right? Like these, these negatively tinged or overtly negative words that we use for
Hmm.
people who enjoy spending time alone. It should be okay to say to, a friend or a family member or a romantic partner, I love you, I love spending time with you, but I'm going to spend some time alone right now. And it's going to be good. And in fact, there's research to suggest, somewhat paradoxically, that if you have some good quality me time, the next time you interact with someone, you experience it more positively. It's going to be a better for your relationship. So you could say to that person, give me some me time. It's going to be good for both of us. When I come back, we're going to have a more positive exchange, more positive interactions, and a better relationship. And, let's normalize that. Let's make it okay to say that.
Robert Coplan is a professor of psychology at Carleton University in Ottawa. His new book is The Joy of Solitude: How to Reconnect with Yourself in an Overconnected World. Rob, this has been really fun. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Julie. It was a great pleasure.
And thank you for getting uncomfy with us today. How do you do solitude? I'd love to hear your story. Email uncomfy@byu.edu or connect with us on social media. We are at uncomfy.podcast on Instagram. Let's keep the conversation going. Uncomfy is a BYU radio podcast. Samuel Benson produces it, and the team includes Hyobin Kim and Sam Payne. Our theme music was composed by Kelsey Ney. I'm Julie Rose. Can't wait to get uncomfy with you again next week. Before I leave you, I want to recommend another show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts that I'm pretty sure you're going to love. It's called Constant Wonder, and it consistently, or should I say constantly, ranks near the top of Apple's nature podcasts in their rankings. But Constant Wonder is about more than just nature. It's about finding awe in everything around us, including our own backyards. So on the show, you'll hear guests share stories of spiritual encounters with nature, of real-life accounts of human kindness and bravery, like a doctor on a quest to bring care to the homeless. See the world with new eyes as host Marcus Smith invites us to find wonder in every corner of life. Listen to new episodes of Constant Wonder every Wednesday on the BYU Radio app or wherever you listen to podcasts.